Now we're recording again. That was hilarious. And a nice break.
Unexpected break.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I'm worried that I'm going to try to...
I think that's what's happening is like
Yeah.
this is just a little precarious, but that's okay. It's fine. If we can catch it ahead of time, it's no big deal.
As long as we're here ready.
I think that should definitely be part of the final product though.
Right.
Like just seeing the
The
entire
outtake.
thing crash.
Whoa! Yeah, I bet that is. That does look funny. Well, we can have a bloopers reel.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'll be during the credits. Okay, so where were we?
Well-
I was talking. I was trying to make a point that like, so we talk in class a lot about scaffolding and making sure that our students are set up for success, and that just means giving them the appropriate background knowledge so that when we expect them to perform a goal, they're able to perform it based on the information that we've given them already. Does that make sense? Getting to know your kids at the beginning of class is scaffolding for teachers. So if you're not doing the appropriate scaffolding for yourself, then you're not going to be effective as a
Correct.
teacher. It's the same concept.
You
So
won't have the
the
same
more you get to know your kids,
foundation.
the more you identify their needs as human beings, the more easily you'll be able to relate, the more easily you'll be able to have those constructive educational conversations with your kids that are shown to be extremely effective. I think if I've learned anything in this class, I think it's that those conversations are the most important part of learning.
They have such a huge impact.
Exactly.
Right?
Getting to the conversations is the goal of every teacher, because you can't start out with those conversations. That's what scaffolding is about. That's what getting to know your kids is about. But when you're sitting down and you're having a conversation with your students, you know that you've done your job. Like when you're sitting down and you're discussing, the implications of genetic research on the future of biology or something along those lines, which is a conversation that I had with some kids in my high school classroom last year.
I think you do get a good opportunity as being a secondary educator to have
I mean,
sort of more like
and
higher end conversations.
that was just a conversation. It wasn't even part of the lesson, And I think the fact that I was having that conversation meant that the teacher had done his job to get the kids to where they can have those conversations. Because if you're having a conversation about, genetic technology, then the kids have to have the background knowledge to be able to talk about it.
They have to know why we're talking about it.
They have to know the vocabulary. They have to know the basic concepts of biology in order to have the conversation in a realistic way. And I think the same is true for ECE kids. It's the same for elementary kids. It's the same for middle school kids, and it's the same for high school kids. The conversations change based on the age, but that goal of having that conversation is the same. I think I got a little bit
saying something about human beings.
I think I got a little off topic, but
No,
we'll keep
it's
moving.
fine.
We don't have to worry so much now that I changed.
Okay,
that
okay.
point, so,
Okay.
yeah, because I didn't like having to rush.
Especially when mine's so long.
Yeah, well, we have the conclusion too.
Yes.
So,
So you think also that once you've started having these conversations with students and you're learning more about them, that you're then able to help maybe delegate out to them leadership roles where they're sort of directing and shaping their own learning and their peers' learning
Yeah.
based on what their strengths are?
yeah, I think first of all, it builds a classroom community. Bringing in different strengths from all of your different students. It makes a community out of your classroom itself. And the second thing it does is it meets the needs of the students that are, just beyond those basic survival needs, because that all comes into how the students are reacting to what you're teaching. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like those needs are that. I think I'm off track. So I'll just read this quote because this quote is extremely powerful to me. I had to go find it. But Jeff Duncan Andrade said in that lecture at, was it Harvard? Is that where he was?
I think it was.
Was it Harvard?
So.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was an Ivy League school.
Yeah, he said something that really stuck out to me and something that I want to carry with me throughout my entire career, and that is, you're not academically rigorous if you're not leading on the kid on if you're not you're not academically rigorous if you're not leading kids on the path of freedom, and you're not socially just if you are not giving kids an academically rigorous curriculum.
So there it
That's a good
is.
one.
Yeah. So I think what it comes down to is using the community itself to create learning environments for your students. So those students have their own passions and their own trials that they're going through, and every sort of curriculum that we can come up with as teachers isn't going to inform them as well as their own community is. So part of our job is to try and utilize the community that the school is in order to
Enhance the classroom.
Exactly.
That is within the community.
yeah.
It's all coming.
It's a circle. I like this conversation because I feel like we're talking a lot about the same stuff.
Yeah,
all
which is
tying
going to give us good
together.
Yeah.
sound bits.
Yeah, exactly.
Sound bites.
Bits,
bites, who cares?
So with that in mind, I think letting students choose their topic of interest, while it might not always be practical, it is always beneficial. And that's because you have first of all, your students are involved in the community, and that's always important. I mean, at the very beginning of our class, we learned that the classroom is within the community. The school represents the community, right? Because you're basically pulling from all different streets and corners and, where everybody lives in the community. The school is sort of the center of that community.
It's a safe zone.
Exactly, yeah.
Safe
So
community.
I think what's important about students choosing stuff within the community is that they can sort of give knowledge to their community, if that makes sense. So kids can go out and say, let's say that there's a lake that is polluted in the community or something along those lines, and everybody knows about that lake. It's Smelly Lake or whatever. And the kids decide that they want to do a project where they clean up the lake. They're going to be learning based on the lessons that you're teaching them, but they're also going to be giving back to the community, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
they're
it all
they're
ties
part of
in.
the community itself. And when kids are able to choose their own path, that gives them the freedom and the power to learn, basically.
It doesn't just get them so much more excited about.
Yeah, I mean, it also makes it really fun, and I think that's how you bring the community into the classroom. It's not about artificially trying to, let's go meet the mailman. I mean, that's important in its own way, but I think letting it happen organically, where the students are your kind of co-conspirators, sort of invests them in the classroom, and not only that, more importantly, it invests the community in the classroom, which eventually will change the school itself, which will eventually change the community. But that's getting back. That's like the last thing we should be talking about.
Or the next. So we talked about designing our lessons and some of our curriculum around the community, and I guess the question is how does that really affect the classroom and the community of the classroom? So we're talking about bringing the outside community into the classroom for that separate other community. I don't know where it's going with that. Amanda,
So how
how
do
can
you
instructional design
yeah.
affect the classroom community?
How do you design a classroom community?
It's hard, but it also has a huge effect on your classroom as a whole. I took a quote from Tharp that says, "Learners construct their own knowledge through their experiences with the material of the world, and by observing how that material responds to their attempts to manipulate and explain it."
Oh, that's great.
And I think as teachers, we need to strive to present our materials to students that are applicable to their lives, such as you just said about going to the community pond and cleaning that up. And that just gets them excited and thriving to learn. And it can be approached from many different angles depending on the grade level. But also, we need to be aware of the emotional needs of our students, and they come to our classroom, and our classroom needs to fit each student's needs. Whether that may be they come from a world of hurt and pain, or they just come to learn. But we need to be able to understand that. Let's see. And then also, as urban teachers, we need to look at it from the CREED standards, which is research on education, diversity, and excellence. And those 5 standards are joint productive activity, language development, contextualization, challenging activities, and instructional conversation. So with all those 5 CREED standards, we can make the classroom designed to make that community whole.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think that would also be a good point to transition to a nice voiceover that'll allow you to unpack those more.
Yeah.
Just saying that for a video now. Because yeah, that seems like harder to fit into the context of a conversation.
Yeah, because it's kind of
Yeah.
yeah. What we could do here is kind of, we can either pick some of these, or we can synthesize them, or we can post all of them, but we can have like either scrolling words
Yeah.
or
'Cause
like
it's a lot,
something
right?
come up where people can read it, maybe with like a
I think
background
so,
of a
too.
picture or a video of kids playing or something along those lines.
Yeah.
What the teacher needs to be doing in every CREED standard, how the teacher
I think
can
so too, yeah.
effectively.
Well, that way they can look at it and they don't like miss words
Yeah.
too, you know? So do you want me to just talk through all of them? 5 points, or what do you think?
Because like that would be something that would be good maybe to record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think like with the better stuff, do the voiceover. We're either not going to do slides, but you're saying like maybe have like a video and then like freeze it on a still frame of that. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah, something
start
like that.
putting the points up. It shouldn't be hard to find that.
Yeah.
Teachers introducing each other, language and literacy.
And I think I have I got some pictures of some of this stuff.
That would be, yeah. I mean, if you're good with that, because that is a lot to, that's a
Yeah,
lot.
and it's not really conversation, it's just like telling.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
What part of this could be, but, well, I feel like I want to let you do one, at least a good, like, sort of off the cuff. I can't think of a question to ask.
Well, let's just ask this.
Straightforward.
What specific things does a teacher need to do to make sure that they're implementing these standards, and why are these standards even important in the classroom? Like, why specifically these?
It's a good open-ended question.
Should you want me to say like all of these ones?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can
Just
you can-
whatever you like.
whatever you're
Yeah.
thinking of. So what?
Whatever.
First of all, why the CREED standards? What's important about these standards specifically?
It's a guidance for teachers, schools, educators to follow that is good pedagogy, that is effective in learning.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of sums up and wraps up the idea of a transformed classroom. When a teacher is able to hit all of these points, in the end you have a classroom community that is just full of knowledge and all of that stuff. There's groups, there's kids working there, there's kids working over here, there's a group working with the teacher. We're working on the language and literacy across the classroom. They're making meaning and connecting it to their own culture. They're thinking complexly, and there's conversation. It's just a lot of interaction, and through that I think the kids in the end make more meaning from their lessons.
It sounds like they're getting a more enriched
Yes,
education
exactly.
compared to what we spoke about earlier about the traditional classroom,
Yeah.
Yes.
where you just don't hear about any of those things really being considered that
Yep.
much. It's traditional. You show up, you sit at your assigned seat every day, stay there the whole day. We're going to do everything from those seats.
Yes.
I don't care how uncomfortable they are. You get a lunch break and a recess. The rest of the time, I'm just going to be up here talking to you.
Mhm.
Whereas this is talking more about, like, again, even going back to what you said earlier about some of those needs, we're going to be putting fun into this.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure that they're surviving, that they have freedom and power. That's all being placed within these.
Yes. It all
Standards.
ties together here.
The intricate web that we weave.
And I think it's good to point out too that instructional conversation is the last CREED standard.
Yes.
So again, I kind of see it as all of these things are how you get here. Because if students are having instructional conversations with each other or with their teacher, then they've arrived. They're at the place you want them to be to have those conversations. Because then they can go home and they can be the kid who tells their mom about all the cool things they learned in school today.
That's what parents want, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you
Maybe.
can, if
That's
you
an
can
assumption, I
synthesize,
guess.
if you can take all of this information that you're being taught throughout all of these CREED standards, joint productive activity, language development, like vocabulary, things like that, contextualizing, making different connections between various parts of the curriculum or even various parts of what you're teaching in other people's lives.
You could even send the kids home with like a little sheet that they fill out at the end of something like a day or so, and say like, well, what did you do today?
Well, like that
And what did you
one
learn from that?
homework assignment we got in this class. What is it? Where they had to go home and do the math lesson. They taught it to their parent.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Whatever that one was called.
If kids can synthesize what they've learned, then they've learned it.
And I think that's
It's
a good thing to remember when we're talking about assessments.
Yeah.
Because it's like, are you okay? So I've just given you all this stuff, and maybe it was a lot. Maybe some of it you really latched onto, and other things are a little fuzzy. I feel like that's the way I was when I was in elementary school. I would get certain things, but not everything. And so I feel like wouldn't a good assessment to be like, how well can you synthesize what you just what we all just sort of went through? What did you get from that? And then just have that be like a sort of assessment. It's not really for a grade, but it's something that's handed into you, and you as a teacher can spend your time going through it and making sure, like, okay, did that work? Because it doesn't seem to me like any of these kids understood what I was trying to get them to learn, but they had fun, they had a lot of needs, they were engaging, there's all these other things, so it's not a complete loss, but what can I do to better guide my instruction? And I don't feel like that would have been a great transition for my next point.
There was
early.
I don't know if this will be
I
on the
wasn't trying to
camera or
do
not,
that.
but be careful.
Oh, jeez.
I don't want the same thing to happen.
No, yeah. Thanks for
This
reminding me.
this wasn't in my conversation, but this relates directly to one of the readings that I did, and I'll have to reference it later because I don't remember what it was. But they basically talked about assessment. Like, okay, so you have a lesson, you have a concept that you want kids to learn. So what's a good concept for elementary school? Like an overarching. So you have, I don't know if it's like high school, but in high school we have like 6 units per quarter, and we have to dive deep into a unit and then come out and do another one.
It depends. Elementary school is interesting because it really just depends on what grade you're talking about.
Yeah.
Just do fractions.
So fractions, right? They want to learn fractions,
depending on
right?
whatever grade level.
So
I
let's
think
say
fractions is
the big goal here is that they understand fractions. They understand what they are, why they're used, how they're used, where they're used, and all the details. Here's a lesson. Here's a lesson. Here's another lesson. Here's another lesson. Here's another lesson. Here's another lesson. There's another one, right? You do it for a week, 2 weeks, however long, and most assessment is, what did we do here? 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 And at the end of it, it's fragmented. They have no connection between all these things. But transformed classroom assessment is, what did we learn here? What is this? What is the big picture? Why did we do all this? And if they can get here, then you've done your job.
That's good. Yeah. And true.
Power and voice.
Power and voice. This is not a good transition for power and voice, but we'll just speed on.
Oh, well, you can always.
Yeah. Okay. So this is my section.
Should we try to get a good lead in?
Yeah.
You want to ramp up to it? I felt like I inadvertently started ramping up to what I was going to talk about. And
To the very end.
I was like, I didn't mean to do that.
It's good
That's
because
not where I was heading.
the
originally.
next 2 sections are fairly short, so that's
yeah,
good.
and then that.
And then the
yeah.
closing. So let me think about power and voice a little bit.
So earlier, when you were talking about some of the basic needs, you mentioned a word that I just kind of want to have unpacked a little bit more, and it was power. And were we talking about like empowering the students, or like you mentioned that there's this great relationship between power and freedom, where they sort of weave and tie in together. But like when we're talking about the power, how are we giving the students their power? And what can you say more about that?
Well, I think from what I read, the transformed classroom is a democratic classroom, if that makes sense. And what that means is that in a democratic society, power is given to the people because they have a voice. So they're able to make decisions and their voices are able to be heard.
Especially if they have big bank accounts.
Especially if they have big bank accounts. we can debate whether or not
You're right, though. You're right.
we can debate whether or not we live in a democracy or a plutocracy or an oligarchy or whatever. But a democratic classroom, which is what we're really talking about, gives students power by giving them a voice. So
Absolutely.
we talked a little bit about earlier about students being able to choose lesson plans. That's one example of giving students a voice in the classroom. So if students are able to come to class and they know that what they say in class is going to be taken seriously, then you're going to gain their respect because you respect them, and they're going to feel like they have power in the classroom, which is one of those basic needs that everyone has. And this is a really easy way to do it. So through instructional conversations, building relationships with your students. So when they come to your class, they're invested in you as a person, they're invested in the relationship that you have with them as a person, rather than being invested in a letter on a piece of paper. I got my high school transcripts for the program last week, and I haven't seen them in 10 years or more, like 12 years. It's been a long time since I was in high school, but I looked at them and I thought, all the work that I did in high school amounted to this, like this one page with stuff on it about this long, and there were just letters and names of people that I don't remember next to the letters. Like, it didn't matter at all. And I think where voice and power in the classroom can change that is, if I had a relationship with one of my teachers, not an inappropriate relationship, but a relationship with one of my teachers that it was more about that relationship in the classroom than it was about the end product of a grade on a piece of paper. Which is really, I mean, that's sad when I look at that. That was what my high school experience amounted to.
I think that's what a lot of ours.
And that's what everyone's high school experience amounts to in the end. But I think what makes it more memorable and what makes people learning more in the classroom is having the relationship with the students, right? And really listening. Vito talked about meaningful dialogue, and what he was basically talking about was I think as adults, we have a tendency when we talk to kids to sort of be condescending. The younger they get, the more condescending we are.
It's actually a challenge of elementary school teachers,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. And I think it's a challenge for high school teachers, and it's definitely a challenge for college teachers as well. But
I guess
giving
you're right. Each for different sort of
yeah,
roles.
I mean, the problem that teachers have is that we talk so much. Our job is to talk. That when the kids talk, we don't actually hear what they're saying.
Exactly.
And the goal that Vito was talking about in meaningful dialogue is to actually listen to the students and hear what they're saying and adjust
beyond what they say.
adjust what you think, because a conversation isn't I come in, I have an idea, I tell you my idea, and you go away with a changed mind. That's not a conversation, that's preaching.
Right. Indoctrination.
Yeah, a conversation is I talk, then you talk, and then my mind has changed a little, so I offer something new, and then your mind has changed a little, so you offer something new.
Taking kind of a Socratic approach for when
Exactly.
you don't understand what the
Mhm.
question's about, that's whenever you become Socratic instead of condescending, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, hey, say, well, tell me more. What do you mean by this? And then maybe you'll have a moment as a teacher where you do understand, and that's because you had that conversation.
Yeah.
A meaningful dialogue.
Meaningful dialogue. Instructional conversation, which is part of the CREED standards. I mean, it all ties together, right? Giving your students voice and power in the classroom is essentially having those conversations, but coming at them not in I think having an agenda is okay, but pushing that agenda in a conversation isn't okay. So allowing the students to explore, allowing them to make mistakes in their conversation, I think is really important. And not, continually trying to be the person that's on the platform presenting information, but letting your students ask questions, come up with their own solutions, be they right or wrong. I think that's important. That's part of, in a science classroom, which is what I'm studying for, that's part of the scientific process, is asking questions, coming up with possible solutions to those questions, testing to see if those solutions work, and if they don't work, asking why didn't that work and coming up with maybe new solutions to why it didn't work. I mean, and I think that's important in a science classroom, but it's also important in other classrooms too, because that's how people learn. They can ask questions, they can perhaps get the answer wrong or right the first time, which good for them if they did. But I think more importantly is let them get it wrong. You know, don't be in such a rush to give them the answer right away. Let them struggle a little bit, because that's when they actually learn something, is when they're struggling. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's how I feel like I learn more from failure and then understanding
Absolutely.
why it failed than I do from just getting something right the first time. I could easily forget about it. Which is, I wanted to talk a moment about like praise and praising students, and when are we encouraging them? You were talking about like when they come up with some solutions and whether they're right or wrong. Like at what stages are we as teachers sort of pushing them in the right direction with positive feedback?
Well, this is something I was thinking about the other day, and I was thinking about the example of like a basic like capital. You do something, you get paid. You do something, you get paid. You do something, you get paid. And I think anyone who works in a menial job or a job that is a wage job, or where you get paid by the hour, knows that you're not fulfilled by that reward model.
Pavlovian responses don't always work for
Exactly. I think conditioned reward models tend to get boring after a while. I think that's just human nature. And so I think what we learned earlier in the year about inconsistent praise, even though it sounds really weird, it works really well. And
that goes back to the needs of some students too, right? Don't some students really have this? They have this need for this sort of positive feedback, and that's something that I was thinking about from my early internship when we were talking about allowing the students to sort of ask plenty of questions or be called on a lot. But what about those students that are like habitually, like always wanting to give an answer, or that they feel hurt when you haven't called on them?
Yeah.
Like, so how can a consistent praise model sort of help that?
An inconsistent praise model is basically being stingy with your rewards, hoarding the rewards as a teacher. And it sounds completely counterintuitive. But
I've got your recess. You want it back?
I mean, so even though it sounds counterintuitive, there are studies that have shown that when you hoard the resources of praise as a teacher, and then randomly, not consistently, you heap that reward on one person who's doing a really good job or does something that
The jackpot
theory, basically, right? Which, ironically, I was listening on the radio a couple weeks ago, started when they were training dolphins. Because dolphins have big brains, and they would do the they would do a trick, and then they would give them a fish, and they would do a trick, and then they would give them a fish, and eventually it stopped working. The dolphins weren't responding as well as they were originally. And then when they went to this model of
the jackpot,
the dolphins responded immediately. So you don't have to praise a child every time they do something
too.
well. Yeah,
it really does.
But if they know that somewhere down the road, if they keep doing well, they're going to hit the jackpot, then it's going to work. I mean, they're going to keep wanting that praise. And I think the interesting thing, even in business, when praise is given, it makes the person who's getting the praise want to perform even better next time, rather than consistently saying, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to make sure you're doing this. Like, constantly nagging people doesn't actually do anything.
No, like, who would go to a casino where when you don't hit a jackpot, you're like, it says something mean to you, or like it hurts your feelings? Who would go to a casino?
Yeah.
When
You shouldn't be here. You're wasting your time.
You walk in there and you see somebody like just the quarters are just falling out of that thing. You're like, maybe I want to sit down at one of those.
Exactly.
Because again, I think there is something to that.
And in a classroom community, I think it's important, and this is something that I took right out of the business world. It's important to discipline or correct students in private, not in public.
I'm with that.
I think that's really important. I think, and the reason for that is because when you discipline them in public, you're not only giving them the consequences of that you're giving them, you're also giving them the consequence of humiliation, which you don't want to do.
It's less effective.
And sometimes what you're doing is, I feel like when we're speaking behaviorally, is that these are students who are just maybe looking for that attention anyway. Don't give that to them. Don't give them the attention they want in front of all their peers.
One-on-one conversations when it comes to correction are much more effective than correction in front of an entire group of people. So I think pulling kids aside, as much work as that takes, is going to be much more effective in the long term. And on the opposite side of that, while you're correcting your students in private, you praise them in public. And that has worked consistently in business, where public rewards are given and everybody sees it. So what you're communicating to the entire group of people, your class, is that when you do this, there's potential that you could get this. And if nobody sees that, then the group dynamic isn't really reached.
Yeah, I love it. So are we doing this?
Check the thing really
Yeah. How are we doing? Because I can bust through this pretty quickly. I said enough earlier.
We have 4 minutes. But we've been doing this for like
Oh, a little over an hour.
a little over an hour. So I think, let's get through this in 4 minutes, and then if we have to do the closing after, we will.
Or that can be a voiceover as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So let's talk about
closing.
how teachers, let's talk about reflection.
So I mentioned earlier about reflecting on your assessments and seeing how well they worked, and we'll just kind of peel back to that little piece of audio. But the general sense of it is, when you do things, when you plan lessons and you impart them on your students, you have to make sure that you're being successful in that. That's what the assessments are for. When you're reflecting about your assessments, you're looking to see, what was it that I did that worked? What did I do that didn't work? What about the students? How do they feel about it? So you're asking your students to reflect. You as a teacher are reflecting. This can be done at the end of the day. And also